the right approach. And there are the majority of Palestinians who are committed to a two-state solution that accepts Israel's right to exist. And using a minority of Palestinians as a reason not to move forward on that is going to keep us exactly in this cycle of violence, and it will cause us to return to where we are. And what I fear is the next explosion will be worse, not the same as October 7th. So we must focus on exactly that word, hope. We must deliver hope for our region, and that is what we are committed to. That is what the kingdom is committed to, but that is what the Arabs that we have engaged, all of our Arab colleagues are committed to. And it is, by the way, something that all of the Muslim world supports. And, because there was a question about the OIC, and I understand the criticism that the OIC could do more, and certainly we will try to do everything we can to stop the conflict. But I will say that the engagement of these 58 states across their various partnerships has resulted in movement, has resulted in a hardening of the consensus that the two-state solution is a necessary outcome of this crisis. It has resulted in countries that were not willing to talk about recognition of Palestine before, that have now started to talk about recognition of Palestine, even independent of a resolution of a bilateral negotiation between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And this is all important, because the more we build momentum towards hope, towards the consensus of a two-state solution, the more it becomes difficult for spoilers on all sides, including in the Israeli political spectrum, who actively obstruct every attempt to reach a resolution. The more that consensus in the global community of nations builds, the more those spoilers are isolated, and we need to isolate those spoilers.
And just to pick up on what Zippy Livni said there about Hamas.
Well, certainly, I think it is absolutely correct that Hamas was outside of the accepted majority of the Palestinian people, the Palestinian Authority, the recognition of Israel, the recognition of a negotiated settlement, their refusal to advocate for violence. But there has to be also accountability in why Hamas was empowered in Gaza and why was it being financed in Gaza to perpetuate the division between Hamas and the rest of the mainstream Palestinian peacemaking entities that existed, whether it was the authority or the PLO or the general public. So here again, I think this is an issue that has been neglected, and that should be addressed as well. But I think the current circumstances and the objectives, and there was a mention of the lack of consistency. This is unprecedented. This is the first conflict where there has been a reluctance to call for a cessation of hostilities. In every other conflict, the immediate task has been for a cessation of hostilities and then the resolution of whatever dimensions of a problem through the negotiations. And it's surprising that, well, if there is a reluctance to ending the military engagement, then what is the objective? Is there an achievable objective? And I think the conventional wisdom that there is not. There's not an achievable objective to be had in eliminating fully the ideology behind Hamas. And to only do that is to provide an alternative that can raise hope, that can break the cycle of violence, and that can respond to the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people, as we have all recognized the legitimate aspirations of the Israeli people and their right to live in peace and security. But that right has to encompass all of the states of the region, including the Palestinians.
You've asked me the question of the division within the EU. When it comes to the two-state solution, I have to say that we are all on the same page. We know that this is the only solution to resolve the problem in the Middle East, to have two states living peacefully between, close to each other. And we have to give to give a future a future perspective to the Palestinian people, and to give security to the Israeli as well. So we are working on this direction. We all agree. I know that some of us are reluctant when it comes to call for a ceasefire, but we are all on the same line. The end of the solution, the end of the comprehensive plan that we are working on is two-state solutions. And I have to say, to answer to your question, that for sure Hamas is a terrorist entity for us. So we don't deal with them and we don't recognize them. It's not a government. But I'm afraid and worried when I hear Netanyahu saying that he is against a two-state solution openly. So what is the solution then? That's the problem also as well, that we have to tackle all together. If the Israelis don't want a two-state solution, then what is the solution? We want to have an alternative, but we don't hear another alternative, and that's the problem also.
Kwasi.
Thank you very much. Obviously, I've visited
I would just wait for the microphone.
I visited the region a number of times and seen both of you gentlemen as a minister and as a parliamentarian. The other thing I want to just very broadly ask, we've been talking about the two-state solution for about 25 years. And surely, as Western politicians, we've got to ask ourselves, and I'd love to hear from the Egyptian Foreign Minister and His Royal Highness, why have we made no progress on this for 25 years?
Well, for the best of our efforts, I think there's a lack of political will on the part of the international community and on the part of those who have negotiated. I believe that the Palestinian Authority has indicated on all phases that it is receptive, it is hopeful, it has the best and most to achieve from a two-state solution, but there has been a lack of progress in those negotiations. Whether that is intentional or not, I don't want to make any evaluations, but there is a lack of achievement, and we all bear that responsibility. I think we are totally committed and convinced that this is the only solution, viable solution, that can bring the region out of this cycle of violence and create normal conditions for everyone to prosper and to live in peace. But we have for 30 years been paying lip service. There hasn't been sufficient commitment by those who have the influence and can be instrumental in moving this forward. There has been always a deflection. There either isn't a partner on the side of the Palestinians, or the division that was created to a degree, as I mentioned, maybe prematurely, between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. There's always been an excuse why we should not proceed, the security conditions, the environment of the region, and these, I think, are just a demonstration of a lack of a political will on the part of those responsible, and at the same time on the side of many in the international community who have refrained from making the right decisions and taking the right steps to move the process forward, recognizing that both sides have to make concessions, but they will only do so if they deem it in their best interest.
I have 1 minute left, so if anyone has any final thoughts, because I can't ask any more questions from the audience, but Prince Faisal, if you wanted to address the question that, we've been at this for decades and it...
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pointless trying to lay blame. I think there's enough blame to go around for everyone. The point is, we agree that the two-state solution is the right solution, and it's now time to put all of our efforts into making that happen, including holding those that become obstacles to that two-state solution accountable, whether it is someone like Hamas, if it's someone like the Palestinian Authority, but if it is Israel, then whoever is the obstacle must be held accountable. We cannot hold the future of our region, the future of our generations hostage to politics or ideology, and we must push to move forward.
Accountable and consequences.
Well, exact, of course.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, please thank our panelists. Thank you so much.
You're watching BR24 live, covering this year's Munich Security Conference. This has been the second part of the panel discussion, De-Escalation Challenge. And now up next is a conversation towards stability and peace in the Middle East, Israel's vision, with Isaac Herzog, the president of Israel, which will begin momentarily. So just stay with us. You're watching BR24 live.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We'll continue with the program in the main conference hall. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll continue with the next part of the program in the main conference hall in an instant. May I ask you to please take your seats? Ladies and gentlemen in the main conference hall, may I kindly ask you to take your seats? Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to get started with the next session. May I kindly ask you to take your seats now? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President of Israel, Isaac Herzog, as well as the moderator of this conversation, columnist and associate editor of the Washington Post, דיוויד Ignatius.
So, good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to host this conversation with President Isaac Herzog. I've known President Herzog for at least 20 years and look forward to our conversation tonight. I believe this is the 133rd day of the terrible war in Gaza, which began with a horrific attack on October 7, whose images are in the minds of every Israeli, but in the minds of everyone around the world. So I should begin by expressing our sadness at the suffering of all the victims of this war, Israelis and Palestinians. So I want to begin with a question that I think is on the minds of every Israeli, and that is the issue of your hostages that are being held by Hamas. There have been news reports that you met yesterday with the Prime Minister of Qatar, Sheikh Mohammed Al Thani, and you met also to discuss this with Vice President Kamala Harris. So I know we'd all like to hear your sense of where these negotiations stand and whether you're hopeful that a deal to release the hostages and bring a temporary pause in fighting for some weeks, whether that will be possible.
So thank you, David. This is the most important issue on the agenda in this situation. We have here families of the hostages, and I think we all express our pain and sorrow and sadness. There are here some people who got back from Gaza, luckily, in the first exchange, and they went through hell. I think if we clap to the families here as a show of solidarity. After all, it's an enormous human tragedy. People from the age of 1 year old to 85 years old, Holocaust survivors and people who went through so many tormenting situations, many people who are activists for peace with their neighbors in Gaza, many people who have done so much good throughout their life, incredible human beings, family people. And I think that the world must keep on leaving this issue as a top priority in its agenda. I met with the Prime Minister of Qatar yesterday. It was a good discussion. I think he's doing major efforts. He's taken major efforts and devoting enormous focus on this issue. It's complicated, it's difficult. One has to make sure that we know whether there is anybody who takes decisions on the other side. After all, you're dealing with people who are being hidden and scattered all around Gaza, mostly in the tunnels. And we have to know their whereabouts. We are worried about the medication that came in, and according to our data and information, it hasn't been received yet, or by some of them, by most of them, we don't know. So I think the most important thing for everybody to understand, if one wants to move on and find a horizon in this dire situation, which was initiated by Hamas in cruelty of unprecedented record, the worst atrocity against Jews since World War II, with rape and butchering and chopping and burning and, of course, abducting. One has to resolve the issue of the hostages and bring them back home safely and as soon as possible.
So, I know we all share the hope that those hostages will all be returned to their families. Do tell us, after your conversations with the Qatari Prime Minister and others, your sense about where those negotiations stand. Is it possible in the next few days that we'll actually have a breakthrough and begin a process of release?
So there's first of all, an international consensus amongst the main leadership that I've met here that this has to be done quickly. I was impressed that the Prime Minister of Qatar is very well informed and involved in many details, also with the Egyptians. There's a worldwide effort which is coordinated by the Americans as well, and is the Israeli team vis-a-vis the other side. I can't analyze and tell you how much of a chance do I give to this effort. I do believe that there is an effort of major, I would say, of major weight involved, international weight. I do believe, and I can confirm, that it is an item of highest priority for the sides concerned in this process. In Israel, it's an issue that is 24/7 newsreels about the fate of the hostages, and we could not but think about ourselves and our loved ones when we are dealing with it. The negotiation process has to involve many, many items. I can't go into it because, number one, I'm not the one responsible and I'm not fully advised of all the details, but I must say I'm impressed that there are efforts throughout, and I trust our team that is trying its best, and I hope that the other side will finally decide that it wants to move on. And I don't think they are there. I'm not yet convinced that Sinwar feels that he wants to do anything, and so his people will continue suffering.
I'm struck, as I'm sure many of us are, by your words about the Prime Minister of Qatar, a country that often is criticized by Israel. I want to turn to the subject of this security conference, which is security, and ask you about Israel's long-term security. You're in the middle of a war now, but thinking about the long term, the United States has said, the Saudi foreign minister came close to saying that if there is a halt in the fighting, that a process of normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia could begin. That would be a different Middle East. And I want to ask you what difference in your mind as president of Israel that normalization would mean for your country going forward.
So let me take it a bit higher in a zoom up, bottom down, about a regional picture. The regional picture is pretty obvious for a couple of years already. We have nations moving on with Israel towards inclusion of Israel in the region, recognizing Israel, going for peace with Israel. It started way back with Egypt, then moved to Jordan. We've had agreements with Israel for decades, then moved on through the Abraham Accords with the United Arab Emirates and the Kingdom of Bahrain and the Kingdom of Morocco. And now comes the issue of Saudi Arabia, which I think is a game changer of the highest importance and can definitely, undoubtedly, change the trajectory of our region. But for that, one needs to understand something that President Biden said actually at a G20 summit like a month and a half or 2 months before the 7th of October. President Biden presented a vision, a grand vision. The vision is the connectivity from Israel all the way to India, meaning a corridor of communications, transportation, and energy from Israel to India, which means actually a connection between Europe and Southeast Asia, which means actually a connection from the United States all the way to Australia from a different side of the hemisphere. Now, if you look at it, what happened was that way beyond the war that Hamas waged on us, it's clear that an empire of evil emanating from Tehran is doing whatever it can to derail the process of normalization with Israel. It has its forks from north and south, from Lebanon and Iraq and Yemen, of course, and Gaza. It's spending billions of dollars simply to derail the stability of our region, creating havoc and pain and so much tragedy to the peoples in the region. That is why moving on with Saudi will clearly be a victory over what Hamas did. And that is why I truly believe that moving forward to normalization and making whatever efforts that can be made is a very important historical opportunity, and I hope that all sides will seize the moment.
So the Saudi foreign minister a few minutes ago, speaking about this issue, linked the progress toward normalization to a two-state solution, to the creation of a Palestinian state. So I want to turn to that because it's obviously part of this discussion and the pathway he and the United States government feel towards the kind of new Middle East that you're talking about. You said in 2016, and I've heard you say often, the following: my basic position continues to be that the only way to solve a conflict is by implementing a two-state solution. But you said in December, after October 7, what I want to urge is against just saying two-state solution. Why? Because there's an emotional chapter here that must be dealt with. My nation is in trauma. So I think we understand that trauma. What I want to ask you, Mr. President, is how to bring the vision that you had in 2016 together with what you're experiencing now so that there is a pathway toward something that's different.
Well, I think that we have to understand that reality has been exposed and unraveled in front of our eyes. In my appearance in front of a joint session of Congress on the 19th of July, before the war, I spoke about the vision of peace in the region, but I said that what undermines the possibility of peace in the region is terror. We've gone through 2 years of terror in the last few years, but the people of the world didn't really notice it. They went on, they ignored it. We went through a lot of attacks of terror. And I came to the clear conclusion that you cannot accept a peaceful process with your neighbors if they hail terror. I cannot agree to it. Nobody can agree to it. The mere assessment that one can accept terror as a tool to bring about results of such nature is adverse to the whole basic rules of human beings. I'll say further than that. I think that the free world must oppose, in no uncertain terms, any accommodation or support of terror. What happened in October 7th is that peaceful communities on an internationally recognized boundary since 1949 were slaughtered, and people celebrated on the other side in the Palestinian camp. They celebrated this, and I expect people who want to make peace with us and people who want to move on in a vision of peace in the region, and I do believe adamantly that Israelis and Palestinians deserve peace, and they should find ways and means to move towards peace, and that the pain inflicted must not recur. But for that, we have to hear and see an understanding that terror cannot be accepted in any way. And this is what I said. Israelis are traumatized so much that to come to tell them now two-state solution, a Palestinian state, cannot be achieved if we don't deal with the innermost question of Israelis. How does it guarantee safety to me and to my family and to my neighbors and to my nation? Israelis are worried. You expect them to divide the land and then say, oh yeah, but okay, who runs the other entity and how do we make sure terror will not recur? So I think we should offer a vision of peace, and we should definitely look into a horizon of peace. And I never shy away from things that I believe in, but I think that we have to add an element of reality, of real life into this. It won't happen if we don't find real solutions for the security question of Israel.
So let me just put the question to you again. If there are ways to address that issue that you rightly stress, the security, safety of your country and the people who live in it, if that can be addressed, is there in your mind a pathway toward a two-state solution? So
I would say that saying now automatically a Palestinian state or a two-state solution, it's kind of giving, actually, without intention, kind of credit or award to the fact that Hamas launched a war against us. I don't want to be there. I want to do something else. I say if we want to win and we show victory against the empire of evil and its proxies, we have to move towards the inclusion of Israel in the region with a major agreement with our regional partners, including Saudi Arabia, and in it find the right formula for peace between Israelis and Palestinians. And that's what we have to look for.
So let me ask you about one hard problem looking ahead. Israel doesn't trust the Palestinian Authority. It's fair to say that many Palestinians don't seem to trust the PA either. But Jordan, the United States, many Arab countries have been working to try to build what people are calling a revitalized, reformed Palestinian Authority that would be able to do a better job in every respect, including reassuring Israel about its security. I think we'd all be interested in whether you think that revitalized PA, the RPA people are calling it, might be something that Israel could work with, could help build a future with, and build the kind of security and stability that you just talked about.
So I think it's a very important development. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. One has to see that there are reforms. I know it's been dealt with the Palestinians by the various Arab countries, by the international community, by the United States of America. It's clear it has to happen because part of the problem here is the way, the functioning of our neighbors, and I don't want to go into it. It's their issue, and they have to deal with it. I can only say that from my own experience, I tried time and again to find initiatives that will deal with issues that are not the political thorniest issues, but have cooperation on fields such as, say, climate issues, medical issues. And I didn't get any real response. I hope that there will be an opportunity to have a real dialogue with our neighbors also about that. And I would welcome any reforms, naturally, and serious reforms.
So I think what I hear you saying is that if you can be convinced, Israelis can be convinced that these reforms are real, maybe with metrics that measure performance, that Israel might be comfortable working with this, I'm going to call it again, the RPA in the future. Do I have that right?
So I will say, as you know all too well, the President of Israel is not the executive branch. We have to leave it to the executive branch, but I think I was pretty clear. I think that if we want to move forward with all of the elements on the chessboard or the board as such, it's there and it's possible.
So shifting gears a little bit, I know that you feel that the world simply doesn't understand the ideology of Hamas, that there's an experience that Israelis have had viscerally on October 7 that the world still doesn't understand. I know you brought something that you think will be powerful, so I want to invite you to do that.
So I will first say that the ideology that we have seen is something that the world tends to ignore. The world has seen 9/11. The world has seen John the Jihadist. The world has seen a chopping of heads of citizens in France or elsewhere. We are faced with an ideology of extreme Islam that wants to wipe us off the map. Not all is Islam. I believe in a dialogue with Islam. And you know that there are many Muslim countries who advocate peace and move forward. But this ideology, which is now the focal point of the empire of evil, emanates from Tehran, is of huge magnitude and needs to be the main target of international security forces, because it starts with the Iranian nuclear program, it starts with their ideology, it goes to terror, it goes to their proxies, it goes to the Houthis, who are a tribe of 50,000 people, David, having ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones, something which is bigger than most nations in the world. And you ask yourself, where is this aimed for, if not at the heart of Europe and the United States and elsewhere in the free world? And people have to wake up. So I brought with me a book which was taken by our military in their operation. Our military goes in, and finds in homes missiles and weapons of the worst kind that are aimed to kill all of us. The book is called Nihayat al-Yahud, which means the end of the Jews. You see a Star of David with a sword and and bleeding. This book was written by Dr. Mahmoud al-Zahar. Dr. Mahmoud al-Zahar is one of the founders of Hamas. He's a well-known Hamas leader and a political figure of Hamas. And the book mainly hails the fact that, first of all, we should not recognize the fact that there are Jews and Jewish people, but most predominantly it hails the Holocaust. It hails what the Nazis have done and calls for a nation to follow what the Nazis have done. Now we're in Munich. In the outskirts of Munich, there's the Dachau concentration camp. Tens of thousands of our nation, of Jews, were slaughtered in Dachau. And that's the problem, meaning we have to have a coalition of all of the moderate forces in the world fighting this ideology. And the moderate forces in the world include many Sunni countries too, because they will be attacked by the same jihadists as well. And there's a war raging in the Middle East against these jihadists. But the world, if we are in the Munich Security Conference, one of the main challenges of security in the world is this ideology, because it's scattered all over the world, because it has terror cells all over the world, and we're exposing them with allies all over the world. And the world has to say, stop, we're fed up. We will fight you tooth and nail until this stops, because we cannot accept that in modern times this will be. And we've seen it just 4 months ago. And we want the hostages back. They're another example of this horrendous ideology. Who takes babies like that as hostages? Who? Who takes 8-month, 9-month-old baby as a hostage?
So, thank you for reminding us of the reality of what you're facing. I do need to ask you, as President of Israel, there have been repeated comments here, but you can read them every day in the newspapers from prominent leaders in Europe, around the world, criticizing Israel, understanding the trauma that you experienced on October 7, but criticizing Israel for what I just heard the Norwegian Prime Minister say was a disproportionate response, that too many civilians were killed for the world to accept that comfortably. So I want to ask you, as President of Israel, about your own concerns about the cost for Palestinian civilians, and about whether there are lessons learned for Israel in how it fights its wars that in the future would make for fewer civilian deaths.
Look, there's a rule in Judaism that the life of one person means an entire world. And we clearly are pained by the suffering of anyone. I am clearly pained by the suffering of innocent civilians in Gaza, and I say it all time and again. But when we have the right to defend ourselves, and we are attacked by a huge war machine, which is built underneath with billions of dollars of world taxpayers' money, and turned into a terror organization with the amount of tunnels which is bigger than New York subway, how does one uproot that? It's a very complicated question, because if you want to uproot the terror infrastructure in order to enable a better future for the Palestinians and Israelis, you have to go in physically. In order to go in physically, we operate the rules of international humanitarian law. We alert well in advance. We send millions of leaflets, millions of text messages. We phone call, we direct. We create humanitarian areas and safe zones. Unfortunately, there are tragedies, some of them ensued by Hamas, and some also unintended consequences which are tragic. And we are trying to find the right way to do it with the least amount of casualties. We are operating with all experts, but what we are challenged with, no other army has really been faced with, because this is in our doorstep. You can have a family with a missile of 200 kilometers shooting range in their living room. So you have to go in, and we find unbelievable things in people's homes and villages and mosques and shops. Now, we are trying to deal with that. Part of it is upgrading dramatically the humanitarian aid to Gaza. We are working, we've opened Kerem Shalom passage because Rafah failed and there were a lot of backlogs. I'm reported that today there are 500 to 400 trucks ready to be delivered to Gaza in the UN passage in Kerem Shalom, but the UN is not capable of taking it into Gaza. Why? I don't know exactly. We are working on water desalination, water supply. The United Arab Emirates has done wonders, and so did other countries in humanitarian aid to Gaza and its people. We are working with medical supplies. We are working with bringing in infrastructure for the United Nations as well as food supplies. But remember, throughout all these efforts, our hostages have not gotten anything. We don't even have a sign of life about any one of the hostages. So it is. I'm not preconditioning it because we understand the rules of international humanitarian law, but I'm explaining that no other nation would have done the amount of effort that we have done. And I know it's a dire situation. It's complex. We have to bring the citizens back to their homes at a given moment once we finish eradicating the Hamas infrastructure.
So we have just a few minutes left, and I want to ask you about a question that is of great concern in the United States and I think around the world, and I know in Israel too, and that is violence against Palestinians by extremist settlers. The United States has imposed sanctions on some who've committed violent acts, has a visa ban in place. You're president of Israel. These issues fundamentally come before you. What would you say as president about this violence by the relatively small but very powerful number of extremist settlers?
So you should know we are a nation of the rule of law. We have a strong adjudication system, a very strong legal system, actually the strongest in the country. We investigate, we inquire, we adjudicate, and we prosecute. I condemn any possible act of violence or calling for violence against innocent civilians, of course, against Palestinians. And I condemn it wholeheartedly, and we do that every day in Israel if there are such instances. It's true, we have some instances of violence, but show me a society that doesn't have instances of violence. The question is, how do we deal with them? Are we enforcing? Are we arresting? Are we investigating? I would add more than that. It became like a systematic campaign in order to kind of tilt the balance and smear Israel in this war. There are about 500,000 people who live outside what used to be the 67 borders. And 99.5% of them are innocent, honest, dignified citizens of Israel who do only good. And there are a few hundred of them who are acting roguely, and we are dealing with it, and we are aware of it, and we take note of our friends who are pointing to us and asking questions, and we're giving them answers. But I would not then categorize all of them as settler violence. It's unfair totally.
So we have just a minute left. I'm going to close with a question that famously General Petraeus was asked in the beginning of the war in Iraq. Tell us how this ends in the mind of President Herzog.
So you know that when you're in a crisis, it takes time to exit from the crisis. We have to offer a vision of hope. We have to make sure that the building blocks of real security for Israel and definitely for all its neighbors are there. I actually believe that the exiting from this crisis will also create new infrastructure of security in the region, because all of a sudden the region has understood that it's under attack from evil forces that are directed by Iran. I think we will have to complete the operation, move on to how do we formulate the reconstruction of Gaza, and then, of course, how do we deal in a sincere and open manner, in a dialogue as to the future of the region. But first and foremost, before everything else, is to bring the hostages back home immediately.
So that's a good note on which to end this discussion. Please join me in thanking President Herzog for being with us today and speaking so directly.
Welcome back after these quite intense panels and discussions about the Middle East. Let's talk about them with Tim